Hey everyone, welcome to Devin Talks Tabletop, the YouTube channel where the games are made up. What I say doesn't matter. I'm Devin, your friendly neighborhood board gamer, and today we are back with another creator spotlight, which even though I know you are used to me being an idiot on camera, these are some of my favorite videos because they're conversations that I truly do enjoy and I find them really interesting and insightful. Today I am joined by Henry Audubon, designer of Parks and now designer of Cosmoctopus, which is being published by Paper Fort Games, and that is being represented by Chris here. Chris and Henry, hello, hello.
Hello. Hey, Devin. Thanks for having us.
Thanks for
Thank
being
you.
here. So, in honor of me not opening up the floor to two people at the same time, I'm going to try and gently guide us to one-on-one questions to where it's not awkward for our guests. But Cosmoctopus is Henry's newest design, and it is described as an engine-building, tentacle-gathering board game for 1 to 4 players. As devotees to this enigmatic celestial cephalopod, players will guide Cosmoctopus through the inky realm, a flexible configuration of tiles, gathering resources and obtaining cards that represent relics, scripture, hallucinations, and constellations. By harnessing the power of these bizarre objects and experiences, players will earn tentacles as they strive to prove themselves worthy of Cosmoctopus's attention, which is a pretty epic intro for a board game. I love that description. And as soon as I read that, and also as soon as I really looked at the game, like I've seen the visual media assets online, but I've also seen the game in person when Chris was demoing it at Essen. In my mind, I thought of H.P. Lovecraft, and then I thought of Studio Ghibli. And those don't really seem connected at first, but when you see this game, I promise you, maybe that will come to mind as you think of devotees or cultists of Cthulhu, and then the most adorable cosmic octopus that you've ever seen. So I'm really excited to talk about this game, and let's just jump into the questions. The first one, I'm going to pitch it to you, Henry. So most people will recognize you as the designer of Parks. It's a game that I love. It's a game that is never going to leave my shelf in terms of my collection. It's a beloved title, and it has kind of, in my opinion, it elevated the appeal of its art to the same standard as the elegance of its design. I think a lot of people agree that it is a sumptuous game, both in gameplay and in looks. And so I was kind of wondering if that happy marriage of the visual experience of the game and the core game design factored into your decision making while going on Cosmoctopus.
Well, thanks for the kind words and the interesting question. Parks was kind of built in reverse from
Mm,
normal board games in the sense that the art pre-existed the game.
mm,
And so that was a one of the design constraints that I was working on the Parks project is making a game that showcased this already existing collection of fantastic art. And so in that way, the process is quite different than what went on with Cosmoctopus. But I will say that very early in the design process, early in my journey, I was jumping into software to start establishing the look and feel of the game from a graphic standpoint and trying to establish some of the aesthetics and the visual tone of the game. And a lot of that tone and those early explorations in the graphic design of the game were have carried through to the final product, even though they've been refined and elevated by Chris's work and with the other people that we've collaborated with on the project. So yeah, I mean, I think that there's a feedback loop between the theme and the look and the feel and that inspiring the gameplay and just the two yeah, inspiring each other back and forth. So
awesome, awesome. No, it really is like I love the look of it on the table. Chris, you did a great job demoing it at Essen, and it was one of the games that in my little time off that I had, that I was very eager to, like, oh man, I wish I could sit down for 45 minutes or whatever and just crank out a gameplay of this. So I think you did a good job. If the graphic design was there from the beginning and kind of the art direction, then I can tell why it was so strong and kind of carried through your design loop. Chris, I have a question. Like, what stood out to you and your team about Cosmoctopus? Like, why champion this title as one of the first ones for Paper Fort Games?
So I think that it was via a picture of a sell sheet from was it PAX U last year, Henry? Would that be right?
that's right.
That someone basically said, "You need to try this game." And I believe it was William Brown, the Hungry Gamer,
Yeah.
who sent this to my boss James and said, "This game is excellent. You need to check it out. Why does this not have a publisher already?" And I think very shortly after that, James and Henry had an e-meeting to discuss it. And I think the things that grabbed James even before I was involved were just this idea of this octopus that like inhabits this place in space and the inky realm as being such a unique take on the usual, as you mentioned, sort of Cthulhu vibe, and the fact that usually in these situations you are playing as somebody trying to stop like an elder god coming through into our world, whereas in this, just the fact it's flipped on its head and we're actively encouraging that to happen was one of the like just the most unique uses of that we'd seen. And also Henry's graphic design from the very beginning, the cards, the names of the things on the cards were so esoteric and bizarre that I think it just gripped us. And I know that as soon as I was given the game to kind of have a play around with the first iteration, I was seeing all these really bizarre names on cards, and even then with no like artwork and just the name of the cards, I could already see the sort of path we might be able to take to make this a really interesting and different game. I think one of the other things that really stood out to us was the fact that this is an engine building game. However, it's an engine building game where you can really get into the action quickly. So, with some engine building games, what you find is there's a kind of ramping up period where you're kind of building towards something, but not much else is happening. What we really liked about Cosmoctopus was because you have this inky realm that you can move Cosmoctopus around, you're going to be getting something every turn, whether it's some resources here or a card there. So, even for people who like love engine builders and they're happy to wait that period of time to get their engine going, actually in this situation you still get those little hits of like, oh, I'm getting this and I'm getting that and I can start making a plan. I think that's something that shone through the whole time during the design, the development phase, to Essen, which is what people were picking up by themselves. They were like, we can get straight into this game and it's just such a fun thing to be playing. So yeah, those are some of the things amongst the many things that have stood out to me as we've gone through. And there've been things that as we've gone through I've like discovered more about, and the more I've seen it played, there's loads of things, but those are the kind of the initial impressions that we had as a team.
Yeah, that's awesome. No, I mean, I think that what struck me the most was kind of like the charming appeal of like terrifying lore that's in the game, like you spoke, like the name of the cards and stuff like that. Like it really does build its own little captivating world quite well. So
Yeah.
that's one of the things that intrigued me or excited me the most. Henry, what was your aim in designing Cosmoctopus? Like, what did you want to achieve from the perspective of a designer?
Well, I guess I would just start by noting that this game was made at the height of lockdown, and the strangeness of the game, in a way, reflects the strangeness of the moment in which it was created. And I channeled a lot of the feelings that I was having and just frustrations about the situation in the world during lockdown into this game. And so there's a certain core purpose of the game from my perspective, which was just to express those feelings in my own kind of medium that I work in, which is board games. And so there's a real kind of personal expression going on in this game.
Cool.
But from my earliest published design work, like I'm interested in certain mechanical themes, and I love like riffing on them in different ways. Like as an example, having shared pieces that the players are collaborating to maneuver and select actions through. That's something that I explored through the rocket ships in Space Park, and then through the adventurers in Kingswood. And then this is kind of like a further exploration of what it would mean to have a shared universe that the players are all collaborating to move a shared piece around. And this one, it was exciting to me because it got to have this really striking centerpiece with this great like toy factor kind of quality to it, of the head of an octopus that every every turn in this game begins by you getting to interact with this octopus head and shift it through the inky realm. And there's just a certain like tactile fun to just grabbing a hold of this piece and shifting it along. So that was one thing. And then, I love as a kid, one of my early formative gaming experiences was discovering Magic the Gathering. And I learned so many important lessons in design from that game. One of them is this idea of the color pie. And in Magic, there's 5 different colors, and each color has certain things it can do and that it can't do. And that's a rich topic that's worthy of its own
full interview.
Full interview, absolutely. But I tried to channel some of that into Cosmoctopus, of this idea that there are different suits of cards, and each one does a very different thing, and that each of those suits has a certain resource that speaks to them. And because the suits are so different, the resources become very different from each other as well. And thus that lends this whole rich texture to the inky realm, that when you're grabbing this octopus and making a decision about where you're headed and what you're gaining, it makes a big difference in terms of what you're able to do. So I wanted to explore how you can make 4 suits that are very separated from each other, from the scripture cards that allow you to get permanent ongoing discounts, to the relics that give you all kinds of just ongoing benefits for the rest of the game, including allowing your resources to surge up, or these hallucinations that are these fleeting experiences in the minds of the devotees that are one-off abilities that can have just powerful effects, or the constellation cards, which are your main pathway towards acquiring the tentacles that you need to win the game. And these constellations are an exercise in delayed gratification, really, because it's an investment now, and then you need to go on this journey through the stars, kind of charting this map of the stars to complete the constellation and gain the reward. So I was really interested in this idea of exploring different suits and how they can all plug into a framework of engine building, and also how they can synergize and combine with each other, because that's another thing that I love about Magic the Gathering, and something that I've taken with me throughout my journey as a game designer, is I love the unexpected combinations of cards. And when a player can be looking at 2 things that aren't obvious exactly how they might plug in together, but then they realize, like a light bulb goes off and you see, oh my gosh, if I do this and then this, something exciting is going to happen. And so I tried to layer Cosmoctopus with a lot of those little secret combos and stuff that are there to be discovered and explored by the players.
No, I think what's struck me or resonated with me when I was looking through the rule book and exploring that, and then also listening to how you were describing what I felt like I was picking up on when I looked at the differences between the scripture cards and the hallucination cards and the constellations, is some of the larger games that I enjoy, like Twilight Imperium, Forbidden Stars. There's a lot of different ways that players can approach that in terms of like going after their objectives. And my typical way that I go through it is I try to go the shortest path possible with like the smallest or like the most efficient conversion of resources to do whatever I'm trying to do. And I'm terrible with waiting and building this engine and then letting the engine like overwhelms everybody else by the end of it. And so it's always interesting to see I feel like I see a lot of the things that I like in those games in this, which like when you first look at Cosmoctopus as like a visual package, you're like, oh, like it's light fare, but then like when you kind of really see a lot of like kind of the rich connections between the ways that you can play I really see like the inklings of those strategies that you can really kind of like layer. And when I was talking with Chris at Essen, he was saying, it's a very simple game for people to grasp, but then once they've grasped it and they realize there's only 3 different things that they could do on their turn, then the possibilities of what you can do with that is actually quite larger than people would expect, and like the depth of choice that people have and the depth of strategy that they could pursue is quite rich. And I thought that is really what came to mind whenever I was looking and studying through the game. And even though I haven't played it, I could see kind of like the architecture behind what you had done, and I'm excited to try it out for sure, because I'm ready for someone to be a much better engine builder than me and destroy me at it. But I'm excited. So, Chris, you were talking about one of the things that appealed to you or called to you the most when you first looked at it, and it is something that I also focused on whenever I was kind of researching and checking out the game. What do you love most about the lore of the game?
So, I love there's so much I love about this game, and it's one of those things that over time I feel like Henry's welcomed me into this world of lore that I'm learning more about as we go through. The lore of the game for me, the first thing I love is just this switch that we're not trying to stop this. We are beckoning Cosmoctopus forth. We want to be the most devoted. We want to get his attention, whatever that may end up meaning for us and the rest of the inhabitants of Earth. So just that in general is one of the first things. The other thing I love is that Henry has baked in a lot of like incredible background bits and pieces into this game that are just they're there for people to see, but once you see them, you're like, that's incredibly clever and really cool. So one of the things, and Henry will be able to talk more to this than I can because it's come from his brain and not mine. I've just been along for the ride. Is the fact that there's quite a lot of references to philosophy and also maths in this game in a really approachable, lovely way. One of the things is that the values in the game are all based on Fibonacci sequence numbers. So people will often midway through a game be like, all the numbers are like, they're all quite similar on the different cards. And that gives me the opportunity to explain that, they're all based on Fibonacci numbers, and actually then have a conversation about the fact that the development of this game is really interesting, in that if we need to change values or we need to change something about the game, we have to follow the laws of the Fibonacci sequence and find ways to do that. We can't just tweak it up by, one or whatever. We have to do it in the way that's allowed. And that being baked in and having that there has been a really fun experience. And another thing about the lore is just these esoteric items that the relics are, and these things that I think Henry clearly had an idea of what most of these things were, but perhaps neither of us knew exactly what they were. And that's part of the fun, letting people imagine and what they might be, and having some visual help with that for the relics, but then leaving a lot of it up to interpretation of the players, like the hallucinations, Rorschach tests, so people can see what they want amongst the hallucinations, and letting people make stories themselves amongst that really brings it in. And I don't think it's just me that enjoys that, because the more I see it being played at UKGE, at Essen, the more I see people really getting invested in the lore, and they are making noises about, Cosmoctopus is moving. They're whooping when they get the tentacles. They're explaining how they can see the tentacles poking through the gloom. And there's just something so evocative about it that really captures people's imagination. Henry was talking before about the fact that you move this head around the Inky realm. And one of the things that started happening organically during play tests early on was that players at the end of their turn would turn Cosmoctopus to face the next player. And it's a game where some turns can be really exciting and combo-rific. So having something that ends the turn to make sure other people notice their turn is really important. And that's now part of the game. So at the end of your turn, you now turn Cosmoctopus's head to face the next devotee. And if they're not paying attention, when they look up, they've got these big, beautiful, but potentially deadly eyes looking at them, and they know it's their time to shine and not to waste time. And that's all come out of the fact that this lore has been built and has given people the kind of scaffolding to build these little mini stories on, and that's been really lovely to see, and has all come from the lore that Henry designed.
I think that's so fascinating to look and kind of peer behind the veil, or look behind the curtain and see those little bits that come together, like the Fibonacci sequence. I was reading through the rule book, I I think yesterday and the day before, but when I was looking through it yesterday, I was noticing, I was like, oh, there's a card, and it's, one of the hallucinations that gives you that big, the big bonuses that are fleeting and that just momentary. And it was, you get 8 of something, and then it was like, oh wait, but like you get, is it the favor of the Elder God? I'm trying to think of the token that when you get 13 of a resource.
Yeah, the forbidden knowledge.
The forbidden knowledge. And so that is when you get 13 of a resource at any one time. And it was like, well, you could end your turn with 8 and then get 5 on another turn. And I didn't even think about like those being all Fibonacci numbers. So that's really cool to see kind of like the thinking behind that, which I didn't even consciously like pool onto. But I do like that. And then Chris, you spoke about this kind of like really evocative nature of the lore of the game and how it seems to connect, and so many people focus on it, and it seems almost universal. And I think for me, one of the things that I think about is like the two combinations of horror and awe. And no matter where you are, like whether you're a religious person or a secular person or you're scientific, I think that like horror and awe are such like universal things for us. And so Henry, I love how like horror can be this bridge between religion and science in terms of like how humanity grapples with existential threats that both terrify and induce awe. So what did you draw on for inspiration when coming up with the world for Cosmoctopus?
Well, that's a fascinating set of observations you made about horror and its connection to the larger themes that humans have grappled with for millennia. I was intrigued by the perspective of a true believer, and that as a player, you're not seeing things from some sort of objective external vantage point where you can really evaluate, wait a second, what is the underlying truth of this situation? In this game, we put you directly into the mind of a devotee. Well, you'll even experience the kind of hallucinations that they might be having. So everything is open to question of what is real, what is imagined. The underlying truth and fact of the matter is completely up for debate, because you're not seeing things from an objective standpoint. You're a true believer.
Gotcha.
And so that fascinates me because, we have so many billions of people on this planet, each with their own perspective, their own vantage point that they see reality from. I mean, we are, philosophers have commented for so long that we don't have this objective grasp on reality. Everything that we experience is filtered through our sensory organs and through our minds, through our lived experience. Mm-hmm. And so I'm very fascinated by that gap between reality and reality as it's experienced by sentient beings like ourselves. So I thought that it's a bit of a playful thing to do, to put somebody into a perspective of a true believer who wants nothing but to summon this cute cephalopod from space to visit our world, regardless of the implications. I mean, as Chris was mentioning, I think earlier, this might not be for the well-being of all, or even the well-being of the individual who's pursuing this end. I mean, who knows what the consequences of doing this might be. And anyway, so it's a bit of a playful perspective that I think does get at my interest in just perception and worldviews and the diversity of worldviews that we see in people. So that was certainly something I drew upon to inspire some of the lore and the tone of the game, really, because although there are, we're obviously riffing on cosmic horror and the kind of existential dread of the void of space and all these things, there's also a really comedic layer to this game. This is a funny game that invites you to get in on its tone and be playful at the table. So, it's not something that's super self-serious or something. It's playful, and it tries to strike that balance between, nodding at the vast expanses of the cosmos while also poking a bit of fun at these devotees who have decided to make it their life's purpose to invite this enormous cephalopod to visit Earth for good or ill.
I do think that there is a like amusing and somewhat like kind of like multiple layers deep, Inception joke about the idea of, you were talking about all of us as subjective individuals who have our own filter through which we're experiencing reality. So our reality is, minutely different from the person who's sitting next to us. And the thing that I kind of love about games, and I'm trying to remember, I think it was a design class that I was taking where they said that, the definition of a game is people sitting down, like people sitting down together and everybody accepting the same set of rules for whatever they're doing that like essentially create restraint and limitation on whatever the purpose is, and you have to abide by those restraints and limitations. So it is funny to me that as subjective individuals, we sit down, we're like, okay, we may see the world differently, but for this like one moment, we're going to agree that we see the world the same as we play this game. And in the case of Cosmoctopus, that's then the rules that you're accepting is to be a blind subjective devotee so I think that's kind of an interesting process of jumping into that. Chris, so you have been demoing this game and showing it to so many people, and as Henry said, like first glance, like look, it is a very cute game that is kind of like poking fun at itself, but then also inviting a lot of maybe additional, philosophical and intriguing, like perspective questions to whoever plays it. If you're looking deeply into the lore, maybe you're not. But who do you view as the audience for this game? Like when you see this game, who do you think of that it's for? But then also maybe for the people who it's for that don't know that yet, because maybe they don't give it a chance visually, or if they think that tonally it's not what it is.
That's a great question. I think that it's a game that the more I've played it with more and more people, and we're talking like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of times now, the more I realize is that it appeals to a big like section of board gamers. And I'll take you through why. That's not just me saying that for the sake of it. I'll take you why, why I think that. You'll get people who, the phrase I've started using now is come for the octopus, stay for the game. So you'll get a section of people who they'll be walking past the poster or the banner, and you'll see them stop, and then you'll see them smile at the poster, and then they'll come in. And at that point, I can say, oh, do you want to know any more about the game? I can tell you a little bit about it. And for those people, there seem to be certain like hits when you're explaining the game that kind of draw them in. So usually when you explain the fact that you're playing as this devotee and that, we're not quite sure what Cosmoctopus is, maybe he's just like a space toddler who's wandered off down the aisle in the space supermarket kind of thing. They like that kind of thing. They love the idea of that you're getting these tentacles and that the game is 3 things to do on your turn, and the complexity and fun comes from having like this hand of really cool cards and being able to work out how you can get them to work. So someone who comes who maybe isn't a seasoned board gamer comes in, and what they see on the table is just this, like at the beginning of the game, a simple setup with a cute octopus, and they can see people moving it around. And if you can get them to sit down at the table and take them through, by the end of one round, they'll be playing themselves. And they could be people that have never played like what we would term hobby games or whatever you like to use as your term. Yeah. I've seen families who've got, 8-10-year-old kids sit down and play Cosmoctopus, and those 10-year-old kids will beat the adults because they can like pick it up and they love it, so it works for them. I also get quite a few people that come because either they see Henry's name and they know of Parks, or they see that it often on the banner it says it's an engine building game. And you'll get people who come across who they're like, oh, I like engine building games. Like, tell me about how the engine building in this works. Because I realize for some people, the theme isn't going to be exactly for them. But actually what I hope is that when they sit down and play, they can get the kind of the combo feeling and the excitement of the like engine building and resource gathering, regardless of the other things. So those people who are more into the mechanical side of the games tend to come across, and once I explain it, and and they can come in and they can enjoy that too. And I've seen it where there's been maybe a dad and his kids or someone who's playing with a group that doesn't think it's for them sit down. And once they start playing, they find these esoteric cards and the combos, and they really enjoy that side of things. So I'd say to people who, even if you look at it and think, oh, I'm not sure, have a look at how to play video or read of the rule book, because actually there's something in there for everybody. And I truly think that. I don't think that about every game, but I think in this game, most people that I've found who play this game find something they really, really enjoy about it and want to play it again, which is always a great sign.
Nice. And Chris, just a follow-up question to that, in terms of thinking about the people who this game might be for and like your experience with the game. Obviously like Henry has been with the game since its inception, but for you as someone who has come on as the publisher for it and then has gradually over the course of, hundreds of plays across conventions and across playtesting, seen different people's reaction to it, and then your own perception of the game has evolved and how you view it from the point of like teaching it and showing it to people. In what ways, singular or plural, has Cosmoctopus surprised you as like a gameplay experience?
So I think it's just how much people enjoy the like pulling off amazing combos in this game. Like I love that in games, and I never like to assume other people like that. But from a gameplay point of view, just people can get in there and start playing cards and start doing combos and be really excited about it really quickly, and that has really like surprised me. Again, for an engine builder, the fact they can do that from really early in the game has surprised me. And also just the fact that people get so into the lore and into the fact you can move around and get things and do stuff. People smile a lot when they play this game. And I think that's a really nice thing to see for board games. They're concentrating, but they're having a good time, which is always a combination that you like to see. And again, getting people in who maybe haven't played engine builders and they see this simple game on the table and they play it, and by a couple of rounds in, they're hooked. Whereas if you explained it to them as this is an engine building game and this is what that is, that might not get them. Just getting them into it and seeing that and how quickly they get hooked has really surprised me.
It is interesting to me, the spectrum by which people determine whether they're going to be interested in the game. There are some people that like you have to say engine builder and they're like, okay, now I want to try it. And then there's some people that you're like, I'm not going to tell you anything about the mechanics of the game. I'm just going to let you start playing. And then afterwards you can realize or find out that it's an engine builder, but just like let the gameplay, make the case or make the argument on its own. So It is kind of interesting to me, like almost the dance that you have to do as a designer, as a publisher, as someone who's teaching a game to make sure you highlight the aspects of it that someone is going to be the most interested in. Henry, so if you could draw a distinct parallel between some aspect of Cosmoctopus and another game, what would it be? Or alternatively, what design elements are you the most proud of here and why?
Well, I've already, I think, mentioned a few, like the connection to Magic the Gathering and my interest in the color pie and really separating out card suits and having that inform the differences between the resources, which then makes the fundamental choice of moving Cosmoctopus all the more interesting. But I think I draw some inspiration from the simple engine builders of our modern era. Games like Splendor that are obvious. Like Splendor is hyper focused on just creating a discount engine for yourself. And I, do my own take on that, but explore that through the scripture cards. Or similarly, like the way that resources work in Seven Wonders, for example, where you're also creating a discount engine for yourself. So, I mean, I'm very inspired by the work of other designers and just what has gone on in the hobby game space, especially in terms of like light, approachable strategy games and how people or how designers really are able to pack a lot of rich experiences into a short amount of time without too much like cognitive load up front. Is like, I think that's an important thing for designers to remember, is like empathy for players and for the person who owns the game and needs to kind of convince their friends to play it with them. And then they need to teach the game, and those friends around the table need to learn the game and accept its premise and everything. And so just keeping the player in mind from the start is, I think, a very important thing. But yeah, I mean, those are a couple of examples. But also, I mean, more recently, I'm a huge fan of Dune Imperium, and even though this is far lighter than Dune Imperium is one of my favorite games from recent years. I mean, I'm hugely inspired by that game, and I love some of the cards and how they work with each other. Along those lines, too, I would also mention another hugely influential game to me, and that was influential in the process of designing Cosmoctopus, and it's on the shelf behind Chris there, is Res Arcana, designed by Tom
I own
Lehman.
it, but I have not played it yet.
So that's an incredibly rich game that to me tells interesting stories through its mechanics and through its evocative names of the cards. The artwork by Julian Delval is also, I think, really inviting and makes the whole thing feel like it's this game with a lot of history to it. Like you're opening up a box that's like a spell book or something, and it's almost like Jumanji or something. Like, what did I just find? This board game. And then the resources just, I think, come to life, and the card engines and seeing it go. And I really admire the efficiency of that game that Tom Lehman was able to achieve, where very few engine pieces really, you get a lot of life out of them. It's not a game where you're playing 100 cards throughout the game. You really, in Res Arcana, you play a few cards and you make a few like very meaningful decisions, but it creates a rich gameplay experience. And so, anyways, those are a few games that come to mind in terms of things that have inspired me along the way. But yeah.
No, it's really interesting. And Chris, this is not this was not actually a question I had prepared, but Henry's line of discussion has kind of made me think about it. So, Chris, you both have mentioned over the course of this interview, like the lore of the game and like the name of cards, and I think that is something that I instinctually respond to as someone with like a writing and an English background, like written word and the story that like not even the story that exists, but the story that I, as the viewer, as the audience, as the player, take from that and kind of create for myself like that immersive experience. And I think that isn't really something that is focused on or discussed as much in terms of like game design. I think people talk about production or like core mechanics. But as a publisher, as someone whose mind is centered on what is appealing about this game, because you see a lot of game designs, designers are much more, I think, sometimes, at least I was with my writing, the things that I create, I think a lot of creators are zoned in on whatever their personal projects are. And yes, like as Henry mentioned, like you take inspiration and try to pull in from other people, but like there's a little bit more of a micro view of what they're doing. And as a publisher, as someone who is trying to think of not just working with the designer in their game, but sending forward that game to people and like having it be accepted largely with gamers, you have to have a little bit more of a macro view. And what is your like perception of or like personal importance that you place upon this idea of something just as simple as like card text, like these small nuances that create a larger like mental experience, like an immersive grab onto a game? Like how valuable do you think that is?
I think it's extremely, extremely valuable. And probably testament to how valuable I think that is the fact that we haven't changed, I don't think, any names of cards in this game. I think we've added a couple of new ones, but actually they're so unique to, I think, Henry's like thinking at the time that he designed it, that it feels almost like rude to change them. And they're so important to... The thing that makes them great to me is the fact that they're suggestive enough that you can have an idea of what they mean, but they leave this interpretation space by not being specific that lets people just like come up with things themselves. So you give players, it's like, here's the world. By the way, here's some stuff in the world which you can take and you can like tell stories about yourself and you can interpret in whatever way you want to, rather than saying like, here's the world and here's every single card and this is the name and it means exactly this and here's an exact like representation of it. With many games, as we know with abstract games, you could take, technically you don't need card names on any of these cards. Like theoretically, from a mechanical point of view, you could still play the game with nothing of that on. But actually, the way they're like designed, the names are written and things is just such a like big part of the game to me that for me it's vital completely. Like one of my favorite cards in the game is called Whale Song Euphoria. And I'm like, I have an idea of what that means. Like, I have an idea what that means, but like, I'm not 100% sure. And how I interpret it to somebody else might be different. And that's one of the ones that's possibly the more suggestive. There's some that are like, you know, even more esoteric and bizarre in a great way. So for me, looking at the game as kind of a world and a product and something that people are going to come to and want to really get involved in, those things are essential, because they are what make the game special, and they're what people will discover the more they play it. They're that second layer of like discovery, because the first time you play this game you probably won't get through the deck, so you probably won't see all these names. So on subsequent games you'll be like, oh, I remember that one and I haven't seen this one, and what does that mean? And I've had people around the table talk to each other about what that means and say like, what's the parable of the cracked clam? I don't know, what do you think it is? And all these kind of things. And I think that that's such a lovely thing that I would never want the game without it.
Nice. No, I think that when you leave it at that level of suggestive that you're talking about, it allows the players to create their own personal opinion, but then it also allows like a shared narrative to grow based off of what you're saying, when you kind of have those questions that are, you know, that the game elicits between the players. So Chris, that was just a bonus question, but jumping back to you again, as someone who has spent so much time playtesting, marketing, like preparing for Cosmoctopus to enter the world and to be released from the Inky realm, what games, if any, do you find comparable to it in terms of complexity and length? And then what makes you pick this game over them?
Okay, that's a really interesting question, actually. Yeah, I've played it so many times. It's my most played game. I mean, that's something. If it was on my stats app, it'd be well up there. So I would say that from a complexity level, I'm actually going to describe it how someone, well, more than one person has described it to me. And it's interesting because Henry's already actually alluded to this game before. So a number of people who've played this game have said to me, this is like Splendor, but plus, like Splendor plus. Like I get to do other cool stuff. So not only am I getting stuff cheaper, I've got these cards that I can decide to combo up, and I've got to think about the way that Cosmoctopus is moving around this board. And so people have kind of put it into that sort of like that category themselves. And I'd say that that's a fair comparison in that it has that, like, it's got those, that little, I would call it like a Moorish kind of, you want to like do a little bit more and have another turn and do that. And the actual turns you have are simple and the decisions come from all the rest of the game. From other games of sort of a similar weight, again, ones that it's been inspired by are good examples because I say it sits within the same channel. So things like Res Arcana, I think is a great kind of comparison. Parks, I've had a couple of people say that they've said, oh, it has the kind of like, it's still a relatively gateway level game, if you want to use that term. So one that someone who maybe hasn't played this kind of game would be able to get into, but with a little bit more complexity and thinking space.
Henry, would you say that you were inspired by the designer of Parks?
I would say that there's a shared DNA in all of my work. There's a family resemblance, and I'm always, trying to explore ideas in more depth and things that I took in one direction, because Devin and Chris, I mean, you guys both know this in terms of your knowledge and experience as game designers, but it's you explore an idea and sometimes you have to make a decision. You come to a sort of fork in the road in your journey and you choose, okay, I'm going left. And then that informs one whole system of design. But, there's a lingering question that can be left in one's mind about like, well, what is down that that right path, you know. And so a different game, you can make different choices and explore similar themes from a different direction. And so
well, that's perfect because that was a joke question on my part for people that don't know that Henry designed parks, but your question actually followed into what my next question was for you, which was the idea of essentially what you leave behind within each design. So what darlings did you have to kill during the creative process for this? Like, what elements are not here anymore?
Yeah. Well, it's interesting that you say that, and Chris can attest to this. That I've got a stockpile of just like expansion ideas, and I've like even got all this crazy theming and different mechanisms and stuff for if we're so lucky to be able to do expansions for Cosmoctopus and grow the universe even more, grow the multiverse even. So really, I have tried to include in this core version of Cosmoctopus the best elements that are that speak to the most interesting things that the game has to offer, you know, and like keeping the cards simple. There's a lot of things that, you know, I tried takes on cards that are just a little more complicated than they need to be, or that they don't give enough back for what they ask of a player in terms of understanding this complex card. And so to me, I'm always interested in that idea of how can you get a lot from a little, you know, and how can I give you this simple thing that then combines with other simple things that you already understand to make something really rich that it expands. And so, I mean, in the wake of that pursuit of simplicity, I mean, there are all kinds of you know, convoluted ideas and stuff that were tried and explored, but ultimately didn't fit and didn't like give enough back, you know, to the player. So I don't know if you want like more specific examples than that, but there's just a litany of complex cards and just, you know, all kinds of things that have been left
I
behind.
personally am interested in details, but I think we can leave it because then it, as the game is, it's more suggestive than specific, and so maybe that will entice people to think about potential other universes and possibilities that can come up in expansions. Chris, so I absolutely love the art direction of this game. You were demoing it at Essen. I think it really, you know, stands out. And like you said, I mean, the box cover, something like that, banner size, is going to stop people in its tracks. It's going to make people like go, oh, that's grabbing my attention. So who is responsible for the artwork and graphic design? And I know that Henry has mentioned that he did some of the preliminary graphic design that has stood the test of time. But like, who else has helped bring this to life, so to speak, in the regards to the visual experience?
Yeah, so let's start with the fact that Henry did some initial graphic design. The cards, as you see them now, are very, very similar to Henry's original cards. We've done very little, and again, that was because early playtests, people were like, "I love these cards," and that was before they had any like extra art on, and they were very simple. And I like, if people are saying it to you over and over again, ignoring it would be foolish. So I was very keen to keep that. So yeah, so from a kind of the graphic design of the cards themselves, Henry's like initial vision is there. From the front cover point of view, so the artist who did the front covers called George Doutsiopoulos. He is a very experienced artist. He's done illustrations for books and newspapers and all sorts of things. He did the front cover for Voices in My Head, if you've seen that courtroom game. That's very much more kind of more cartoonish, more caricature kind of style. What drew me to George was that he, on his portfolio, had a drawing he'd done of a sort of 1950s private detective. And it was so beautifully like lit and rendered, and to me just kind of called out this kind of period in time where, you know, weird things could be going on and those things, that I was like, I'd really like to see how he took this and which direction.
Is that similar at all in detail to the PI that's in the game?
It's very similar, yeah.
Okay.
So actually, interestingly, when we came to the point where we had a private investigator, actually he's done another piece of art for the private investigator in our game, who's peering out of the card with his flashlight, trying to work out exactly what you're doing, and it's very similar in that kind of styling and things.
Gotcha.
The front cover point of view, so. Originally was a very, very terrible sketch by me, which you can find on various Facebook groups where I've shown a before and after, which was basically my non-existent artistic skills of like, yeah, there could be like an octopus in the sky and some devotees and those kind of things. And then it was kind of elevated by one George's editions of these kind of amazing colors and all these kind of things. But also Henry's like commitment to this kind of like esoteric, the line art and things in the background. If you look at the cover, it has these beautiful sort of esoteric lines and interesting things, which we tried to incorporate as well. So from an ongoing graphic design point of view, actually, I've put together the rest of the graphic design and the typography on the cards. So we've, again, kept the fonts and things very similar to the ones that Henry chose, if not the same in some instances. And I just wanted to give each card a little something that sets it off if you look closely. So each has got a little bit of typography on it that just is suggestive of the name, and it might be quite subtle, but just something there to add a little bit of extra flavor. And again, to kind of hint at that unexplored suggestion that is made by the name of the card, just my slight interpretation without being too guiding. So that's kind of the combo of the team. And then we've had for the Kickstarter, Alexi Monardo has put together a beautifully rendered 3D video for us of the game being played, and we've got an amazing voiceover by a voice actor called Rob Milton. And I think all those things together are really going to come together to make something extra special when people see this as a page. Nice. So yeah, not a huge team. But some very talented people in the team to bring it together and to make it a joy from my point of view to be able to bring together.
Awesome. Henry, so this might be connected to the earlier question about darlings that you had to kill. But if you could add a module or expansion to the game right now, what would it be?
Well, let's see. Chris mentioned this earlier about the Fibonacci numbers, and how when I started working on a game about an octopus, one of the first things that occurred to me was that the number 8 ought to be of some significance within the game. And I have a background in mathematics and just like a lifelong interest in just like numbers and sequences and things like that. And I knew that the number 8 had this place within the Fibonacci sequence. But it's not the only sequence that 8 occurs in. 8 is in many places. And so I think if I was going to riff on this game in an expansion, I would want to approach it from a different kind of numerological perspective. And one of those ideas that Chris and I have discussed recently is thinking about the kind of idea of parallel realities in the multiverse and mirror universes, and this idea of like a kind of binary bits flip to one side or another, the light and the dark. And so I'd be interested in exploring more of a binary numerical sequence of thinking about powers of 2, which of course 8 is 2 to the 3rd power, Yeah. And so there's all of these numbers, these in-betweens that would be interesting to explore to me. Like the number 4 doesn't figure into a lot of the numerical values represented in the game. And even thinking higher, like just like we in the Fibonacci sequence, we push beyond 8 to explore 13, which of course has a superstitious mystique all its own. Yeah. And what would it mean to push beyond that to the number 16? Anyways, I've got the design for the binary universe expansion kind of mapped out already. So I'll leave that to the future in case we want to use some of that stuff. But that's something that I would do if I was, going to be adding to the game, is I would want to start with some of those. It really does speak to the previous question you asked, Devin, because it's like you make a decision and you head one way, and then you wonder what would happen if you went the other way. And the idea of going with the Fibonacci sequence was something that I chose very early on, and that informed the whole journey that I went on. But I would explore, hey, what if I chose a slightly different path, and what would be the implications of that, and how could I make it work? And so that's the kind of mentality I would have if I was gonna add something to Cosmoctopus.
That's such an enthralling concept. I've talked with a decent amount of designers, and I've thought about my own design stuff that I've tried to work on, and there's a lot of different stuff that has essentially guided my thoughts or guided the thoughts of people who seem to talk about their designs, but I haven't really thought about like numbers as like a core tenet and like guiding principle for why you do something. So the idea of like the Fibonacci sequence being like a backbone of some of your decision making in terms of design, but then also thinking like if you just focus on one other different like number structure, number sequence, or like pathing, how that might shift what your game is and the decisions that you might make. I think that's really intriguing to kind of mull over that. Chris, talking about potential things that you and Henry are dabbling over, is there anything hidden behind the veil of updates and stretch goals that you want to tease? Any secrets or
Ooh. Okay, so that's an exciting one. So what I would say, I won't give any specifics away of what's coming up, but what I would say is there are.
Be suggestive. Be suggestive.
I will. I'll be so esoteric that you won't know what I'm going on about. No. So what I would say is that this is a game about an octopus. So there probably will be some octopus-related goals. We may have some social goals that involve octopuses in some way. From a stretch goal point of view and an excitement point of view, I've already told people who've played this game that actually this game's going to get better for everybody, like stretch goals often are. So if we get to where we want, then when you turn your light off at the end of game night, you might still be able to see Cosmoctopus from the gloom. Let me say that. You may even, if you want to charge the box up when it's open, reveal some extra information that you didn't think was there. For example, from inside the box, something that some games have done.
Cool.
If you want to be a very organized devotee, you may even want some sort of insert for the box that is thematically appropriate, that will hold your resources and stop them from being scattered by the inevitable entropy of the cosmos. And also, the cards that are there at the moment, there may be a few that have some other potential, and we might be opening some portals to other places in the game space that people aren't expecting.
That's cool. No, I'm super excited to see how the campaign unfolds and see what gets revealed. Henry, one last question before we wrap things up. What is your biggest takeaway from designing Cosmoctopus that you plan to take into future projects?
That's a great question, but I just want to call out before we move on.
No worries.
That there's an octopus plushie to be had, a Cosmocta plushie.
Yes, I can't believe it.
I was about to ask that after
it's on the shelf behind Chris. There's an example.
I was going to say, I can't believe I forgot to say this. This is like one of the things that lights people's eyes up. Yes, and actually, this is the first time it's been on screen and not just a photo. I just like to point it out. So here we have the prototype Cosmocta plushie, because why wouldn't you call it that?
Okay.
And so everyone who backs in the first 48 hours will get one of these just for free. Let's get it for free. And later on, people can also add them on. So if you want to have your own army of Cosmocta plushes to release into your local neighborhood, then that's completely doable.
No, I was going to off camera after the interview. I was going to be like, guys, if you aren't doing that plushie back there, you should do that plushie.
We are. It's just my mind. It's weird. I've been thinking about this plushie for weeks, right? And then the time that comes for me to talk about the plushie, it's just gone out of my mind. Such is the fleeting nature of Cosmoctopus as an entity.
Yeah,
I understand. Another devotee was stronger and pulled him away from you. So
that must have been it. Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Henry. Thanks for the heads up.
Oh, of course, of course. No, I'm excited about it. So Devin, to answer your question, I mean, I think one of the lessons that I learned about Cosmoctopus, and maybe there's a lesson here for any designers who might be watching, but this game, the way it all came about was quite non-traditional and a little different than how many board games are designed, or at least what the prevailing wisdom is surrounding board game design. Because when you look up advice for what to do as a designer, you see a lot of suggestions like fail faster and play test as early in the process as you can, and things like that. And this game was not designed that way at all. In fact, like none of my games are really designed that way, but it was designed in isolation as a true passion project where I pursued what was interesting to me, what spoke to me, what really resonated, and I drew upon my own tastes like heavily in terms of just what excited me. So I think it's important to spend time really searching within yourself to find some authentic vision that you can bring forward with whatever you do artistically, whether you're a game designer or you're a musician or anything. It's like it's easy to I think rush out to get opinions from everybody and kind of crowdsource all of these decisions, but there's another path that's available, which is like to really find an authentic way forward from within yourself. And I tried to not only channel that into the game, like bring my vision forward into the game, but I also tried to communicate that vision through the sell sheet that then eventually was my path to meeting to Chris and the team at Paperfork Games. And so I would just suggest to designers to not only explore like finding really authentic projects to work on that express your own tastes as a creator, but also to make sure that you communicate those ideas in a way that is compelling, and think about the product, make sure that you have like a lot of just memorable hooks in your game, whether it's the language that's used, that it's evocative, if it's a memorable name, and just make sure that you think about how a game can be marketed, because a publisher is going to have a lot of work ahead of them in terms of like figuring out what is the angle that we use to kind of get people interested in this game. And I think designers can do themselves a lot of favors in terms of like getting their games picked up and generating interest in their games by doing some of that work in advance while they're designing, thinking about what are the ways that a potential publisher might be able to market this game, and what are some exciting like language that can be used to describe this and to invite people into the world. And actually, just I would. The last thing I'll say on this question, Devin, is just that I think language is very important in games. And like what we're trying to do as designers is, create immersive and playful experiences for people at the table. And when you provide people with language that they're excited to use to describe the things going on in the game, it helps the immersion process so much. Yeah. The fact that people can talk about the inky realm and they're gaining whispers that then evoke hallucinations, and they see the stars through constellations and tentacles emerge and a portal opens and Cosmoctopus arrives. It's like you, by providing people with a whole package of language to describe what's going on in the game, you make it easy for them to invest in your theme and get immersed in it, and have playful moments within your fictional universe. So those are a few things that I know I'll be carrying forward onto future projects, and just food for thought for any designers who might be in your audience watching.
Nice. No, I think that is, I think that you can definitely, in any field, but especially in a creative field, like if you feel like you need to push through something, there's this idea that like, what's the group think say? Like what is the larger prevailing ideology or school of thought into how to push past that? But I do like the idea of essentially, looking for that inspiration and finding that pathway forward, sometimes in isolation, and that can happen and sometime also create a something that is a little bit more like unique or special to whoever the designer is, whoever the creator is, because it's whatever distillation of their solution is more kind of like, I think, cohesive to maybe their original intent versus whatever the amalgam of whatever other people think and having influence on the game. So I like that idea that despite whatever like the best buzzwords or the best solutions that people assume, that there are alternatives to that you can kind of push towards yourself. So I do think that's good thought.
I would just add one thing to it, which is that we are in a really exciting period in board gaming where so much is being learned about how to design games. And I think there's a really bright future ahead in terms of game design in general. Nice. And that I think it's wise for us to be open-minded about what the best methods are for designing games, because I think that the truth of the matter is that we are at the foot of the mountain that's ahead of us, and there's a lot to learn, and there's a lot of just unknowns before us as designers. And I think people should be careful about being too prescriptive about like what others should do and what's the best way to do things, because I think so much of that is unresolved and absolutely not sorted out yet. And so I think what works for me may not work for others, but I think that designers should try to find an authentic path forward for themselves where they can express what is unique to them, and don't be overly swayed by the influence of others. It is important to learn from others and to hear people out, but remember at the end of the day that we are creating. This is a kind of art. This is a craft, and there's the mountain before us. So we can all just be humble in the face of open-ended possibilities.
Yeah, and I think what I took away from that is that Henry's just trying to say that we're all these seeking souls out there, reaching out into this like inky black, trying to grasp hold of just one tentacle of game design and answers out there.
Yes.
And we haven't found Cosmoctopus yet, but we will, because we are at the foot of the tentacle of the octopus.
Indeed.
That was pretty much exactly what you said, right? And just in summary.
You captured it even better than I ever could.
Well, I just want to say thank you to all of you who have been here with us watching, and I appreciate you taking the time to listen along as, Chris and Henry have been so kind to offer up, their stories about Cosmoctopus and share with us kind of a little bit more in detail about the game. And if you are interested in learning more about this, there are assets out there, there are groups out there, but more specifically, there is the Kickstarter for Cosmoctopus. Depending on when you watch this, it is launching on October 25th, I believe.
That's correct.
October 25th. So that's from the filming of this, that's 1 week away, but for whenever you watch it, it's check your calendar. I don't know when you're watching this, but so if you want to go out and check that, look at the Kickstarter page for this, maybe join and back and see if you're interested in learning more about the inky realm out there in the great beyond. So thank you all for watching, and Henry and Chris, thank you guys so much for being here.
Cheers.
Thank you very much for having us, Devin.
We'll see you guys next time. Have a good one.